we have people who really don't know very much about anything, who nevertheless feel entitled to, as I say, I have a right to my opinion. Well, hey, I wouldn't deny them that. It's just that they think that the government has a duty to make their opinion law. At one time, I thought that if the government took control of various things, they could do a lot, particularly for people who are poor, less fortunate one way or another. Over time, I've learned that that really does not work. I mean, it sounds better, it doesn't work.
You said in an interview with American Enterprise Institute some time ago, after quoting Eric Hoffer as saying, intellectuals cannot operate at room temperature. You said, there always has to be a crisis, some terrible reason why their superior wisdom and virtue must be imposed on the unthinking masses.
Yes. You can go back over the last 100 years. You can go back to eugenics in the early part of the 20th century. You can go back to Keynesian economics. You can come forward to the environmental movement. There always is something which requires them to substitute their wisdom and virtue for our lack of understanding. The vast majority of intellectuals don't really originate any ideas, but they peddle ideas that other people have originated. That gives them a great deal of freedom because ideas are so malleable, words are so malleable. Reality is not malleable. And so they can believe in all sorts of things which have no realistic possibility and which have failed time and again in history. But because they know how to rephrase it and repackage it, they can just keep right on going.
You said it's amazing how many people seem to think that government exists to turn their prejudices into laws. That's May 5th of 2004.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I hear people say, I don't understand why you know, this company CEO makes all this money. The government should do something about it. Or they say, you know, the pharmaceutical companies spend more on advertising than on research, and the government should stop that. And I remember writing back to one of these guys and saying, what facts do you have? What expertise do you have? What anything do you have that enables you to say how much advertising and how much research somebody else should be doing in a field that you have no knowledge of? But I think it's one of the sad signs, I think, of our educational system. We have people who really don't know very much about anything, who nevertheless feel entitled to, as I say, I have a right to my opinion. Well, hey, I wouldn't deny them that. It's just that they think that the government has a duty to make their opinion law. At one time, I thought that if the government took control of various things, they could do a lot, particularly for people who are poor, less fortunate one way or another. Over time, I've learned that that really does not work. I mean, it sounds better, it doesn't work. Just recently, I came across one number which should have destroyed the whole notion of central planning, and it was that there were 24 million prices in the Soviet Union. Now, there's no human being capable of setting 24 million prices properly, especially when you realize that each price has to be set properly in relation to the other 24 million prices. So you can't even break it down and have, say, 24,000 people, each one with 1,000 prices, because the point is they all have to mesh relative to one another. But if you have a country of a couple of 100 million people, and each person keeps track of only a relatively few prices that affect that person, then it can work.
The older I get, the more I realize that arguing on the basis of facts and logic gets you labeled as someone who is out of step with the times, if not lacking in compassion.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That we've reached a point where there are great numbers of people who don't argue in terms of what your facts are. They argue, well, that your motivation must be wrong. You lack compassion for the poor, et cetera, et cetera. I wrote a book about the assumptions from which people start, assumptions about human beings in general. This is a book called Conflict of Visions. And once you start with a certain conception of human beings, an awful lot of other things follow when you talk about justice, about power, about equality, about all sorts of other things, depending on what's your assumption about the nature of man. Dan Rather had a broadcast in '93, if I remember correctly, where he said that 1 out of 8 children in America was going to bed hungry tonight. And I went back and looked up the original study. I mean, there's few things more disillusioning than looking up original studies. And it was utter nonsense from that study. The study wasn't that great itself, but to conclude that 1 out of 8 kids in this country are going to bed hungry at night, when in fact obesity is higher in the lower income brackets than in the higher brackets. I'm appalled that the troops in battle with their lives on the line are being tried now as criminals for actions that they took when they had to make a split-second decision with their life at stake. And when I think of all the excuses that are made for common criminals, you know, he had an unhappy childhood, he ate Twinkies, whatever, you know, and these men are out there fighting, putting their lives on the line for us, and we're sitting back here second-guessing. So it's like the people who second-guess the police when there's a shooting, and they say, why did the police fire so many shots? Now, as you know, I taught pistol shooting in the Marine Corps. I'm not the least bit surprised that they fired all those shots and so many of them missed. That's what happens with pistols. But to think that someone who has never had a gun in his hand is criticizing someone for what he did and is sitting back in air-conditioned comfort someplace, you know, second-guessing this guy who had his life on the line and who put his life on the line to protect him.
By and large, you're not seen often on television. Is that your choice?
Yes.
And why?
There are very few programs on which you can say anything at a length and in a way that will get across what you're saying. And there are too many where you come on and they tape you for half an hour, and they put you on for 3 minutes, and then they put other people on after you saying things against you that you never have a chance to answer. And it just is not a forum in which to really get across what you want to say. Has
it had any negative impact on your visibility or your ability to sell your books?
Not that I know of, but of course we'll never know.
You point out that 0.1% of the people in the world are Jews, but 29% of the Nobel Prizes in science and literature are Jews.
Yes.
Where did you find that, and what does that mean to you?
It'll be in the footnote. I've read so much stuff I can't pinpoint it. But what it means to me is that, among other things, that there is one of many examples of groups that are wholly disproportionately represented in particular areas.
So to all of you great MAGA Republicans, I love
what a farce it is that intellectuals and even the courts think it is something remarkable when there's some group is X% of the population, but Y% of the people in this profession or that institution. That's true all around the world. And it's not just Jews, it's Germans, it's Japanese, it's you name it. You turn on television, it's blacks in basketball. You know, you just run everywhere. And yet, despite this empirical reality that you simply can't escape, people are determined to believe that anytime the groups aren't represented in proportion to the population, something strange must be going on. The Democrats get something like 80 to 90% of the black vote. If that ever falls down to 60 or 70%, they're in deep trouble because they've alienated so many other people that they have a hard time winning elections at all. And so therefore they must try to keep blacks paranoid. I think of this thing about, remember the dragging death in Texas some years ago, and they used that against Bush because Bush was against hate crimes legislation. And the fact is that these two guys who did this were electrocuted. So whether it was a hate crime or not a hate crime, they're dead. And calling it a hate crime would have changed absolutely nothing. What it would have done was open up the courts to all kinds of litigation because the guy is convicted of a hate crime and his lawyer would say, well, it really wasn't really a hate crime, and they can go through the whole Circuit Court of Appeals and so forth. And so to me, I agree entirely with Bush on this particular point, that it doesn't matter what your motivation was. If you did it, you should pay the price.
Why do so many blacks follow the Democratic Party then?
Inertia. Don't forget the Solid South party that followed the Democratic Party for over a century. So blacks have been into this, what, 60-some years now. I'm hoping that blacks will wake up faster than the Solid South did. But these things go, the Jewish vote has gone Democratic by overwhelming majority, and it's hard to see why, given the policies and so on. But once this inertia gets going, it'll keep going for a long time.
What's your impression of the internet and its impact on the society?
Oh, I think it's opened up a lot of things. It's made it harder, I guess, for a totalitarian country to seal its people off from the outside world, and that can only be a good thing.